So that makes me wonder if the huge market for alternative medicine and intuitive healers thrives because it amply compensates for a lack of scientific validity by activating and amplifying these emotive spiritual resonances.
Do you know, as you're describing what the function of the healer has been and has transformed into, I'm reminded of this amazing book by Drew Leader called The Absent Body. And, you know, he reminded me that Descartes, who takes a beating in contemporary philosophy, and especially amongst those who are sort of holistically minded for apparently separating body and spirit, or body and mind, and so on. Leader just says that Descartes probably is better understood describing a phenomenological experience of separation between what you know of the body and what you don't know of the body. And he talks about the internal body then as being absent, as almost like a black box, that even as you take a swallow of water, that, you know, once it gets past a certain point, you can't really locate it anymore. You know, you don't really have interoception. Your sensations and you know, your digestive system and your blood, it's just all like, I remember somebody said to me, how do I even know that I have organs? I haven't seen them, you know, and so it's like the pre-modern healer has to become the poet of that internal black box in a very compelling way. But the funny thing is that, you know, when we move into medical discourses and techniques that lay people can't interpret, but seem to be, but we're told that they're evidence-based, the black box is still there. You know, we can have the imaging, even we can have the blood work, but we can't read it, and so we're still sort of looking at something within ourselves as lay people that we can't understand, and we're depending upon this interpretive presence. And if they're not up to the task of the pre-modern shaman or the pre-modern healer, who is going to invest that interpretation with deep meaning, then yeah, there's going to be a problem.
Yeah, and really, you're extending on what I was saying, right? About how scientific method is what our curiosity about how the world works evolves into, and we've always had an intuitive sense that there were invisible realities that were affecting what was visible to us, right? That there was something in the black box that was powerful and that was of the essence. Right. What science allowed us to do is to extend our senses in ways where we could actually look at that stuff and interact with it and create an evidence-based sort of model about how all of it works. But it's still dealing with what for the rest of us in our everyday life is an unseen, mysterious reality, which is why in some ways people sometimes talk about doctors as being sort of the new priests of some sort of scientific religion.
To answer your question, dissection is relatively new on cadavers. Right. It was considered taboo and illegal in many societies, so you couldn't actually do it, because it was seen to be an insult to the spirit and what a human is. Thankfully, some people got it together and realized that we should be doing these things. It also reminds me of Julian talking about the evolution of science. The single blind trial was a great idea, you know, with vitamin C and scurvy, and being like, okay, you guys take citrus and you won't, and we'll see what happens. But then along the line, someone realized, well, if they know that they're getting what they're getting, that's going to influence the outcome. Or if the doctor knows, it's going to influence the outcome because they might be able to read it on their face. So let's create the double-blind trial. And the double-blind trial has a replication problem, which we're now understanding. So there'll be something that comes out of that. fMRI machines only measure blood flow. There will be better measurements. We so often forget that we're living through history right now, and that in 100 years, some of our practices will be seen as barbaric, and that's okay. But I do think it is important.
Christiane Northrup will be vindicated.
But hold on. This is important, because if in 1,000 years from now, however long you said, Derek, we see some of our practices as barbaric, it still remains highly unlikely that we'll go, oh, but actually how we did it 1,000 years prior to that was the real way of doing it. Right. That doesn't tend to be how it fucking works.
I know. And that's what's so befuddling about it all. When people are like the shamans, and I'm like, the shamans were taking the psychedelics. They were just talking to you after the experience. What kind of healing? Like, I don't understand the romanticization of the past of healing, as if sure, there were probably some amazing methods. And it tracks back to Matthew's original question that started this. I'm sure there are traditional Chinese herbs that do what they say they do. And you know what? Let's use them, but at least be honest with the evidence.
That's right. And the other thing that it makes me wonder about is, if the way that most of us experience medical visits can somehow be reimagined. And I know some doctors do this, some medical doctors do this, where there's some element of experiential richness, relational kind of empathy, some meaningful sense of entering into an experience where you do have that positive state change. It's like the phenomenology somehow gets really, really lost, so that it feels like this very mechanistic experience, even though you're being given something that is so powerful, right? That most of the medicines you're given have such high efficacy. What that might, it seems like it's important culturally and psychologically.
And it points to a book I think I've referenced before by Daniel Offrey called What Doctors Say, What Patients Hear. And it's about the lack of communications with doctors and patients, and the fact that the average patient gets cut off like 14 seconds into explaining their problem, right? Or that the average patient only talks for like 90 seconds during an entire doctor visit. And it's a fantastic book. I highly recommend it. But it really started me thinking about the ritual of medicine and how important it is. I remember when I lived in Brooklyn, I had to switch doctors from the one I had in Manhattan because of my health insurance plan. And I went to this guy. He was a very old school doctor. The first visit, he just talked to me for 45 minutes. And I was like, wait, is this okay? You're actually, because my last doctor I liked a lot, but I never had more than 10 minutes with her. And then here's the guy just talking to me about my life. And I felt so comfortable with him. And I haven't had that experience living in Los Angeles. I had some good doctors, but nothing like that. And if we don't understand that one-on-one bonding with your care practitioner is part of the healing process, whether you want to be your shaman or your doctor, whatever it is, that's such an important component of all of this.
One idea that I've heard floated is actually at a Harriet Hall lecture during the Q&A is someone said, what do you think about the possibility that doctors might have an assistant, as most doctors do anyway, but that assistants might be prepared to have that relational exchange in a way that feels more humane and meaningful, and that contextualizes it in some way that activates the ritual, because I feel like the ritual is important and there's all these psychological components, and they may even have a psychoneuroimmunological effect on the person, speaking of placebo, right? But how to do that without falling back onto some kind of pseudoscience, I think, is the important question.
Yeah, there's really no, and that's the hardest thing I think for people to grok, is that there's no cure-all. Like, again, you can look at something like extremely powerful like chemotherapy and just shut down your immune system for a little bit of time so that you kill the invading cancer, the cells that need to be killed. Like, so you can have that. But in terms of that relationship, if your acupuncturist is a person you just feel comfortable with, that's part of the healing process. And I take no issue with that. Those bonds are important and are lacking overall in our society. I mean, I just signed up for it again. I had 5 insurance health plans in 2020 because of my wife losing her job, because of me going off my insurance, because of the state of California, me getting a new job. And every time I had to look for a new doctor, that is super frustrating. And that part of the process is always going to be a problem. Mr. Socialism is going to jump in Canada.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if we have data on whether that nightmarish turnover has been studied as having an impact on care.
Oh, I'm sure.
And care relationships in some way. I mean, if you have to, let's say it would be like, starting a new therapist every 6 months or something like that,
Yeah.
I mean, a little bit simpler because they're, you're going to arrive and they're going to read your chart instead of take your life history. But still, it must be very jarring to just restart that over and over again. I have a family doctor that I've had for the last 8 years, and she has been with my wife's family for 30 years before that. And I walk into her office and it's like being with an aunt.